Racing Bulls seems to have an absolute allergy to adding any sort of cooling outlet. They've gone square. You still see some pretty big upper elements on the wing. So what's going on? Something that perhaps Red Bull didn't want us to study in such great detail. Here it is here, and once I've drawn over it, you can't really see it. Well, this is all going to look a bit awkward, isn't it? But I do like it. Spa-Francorchamps is the first true high-speed test of the new 2026 Formula One cars, and that will see some really interesting different engineering solutions on the cars up and down the field. This historic circuit is extremely fast for 2/3 of its length, but also quite technical in the final third. That's the middle sector, of course, and that will provide some really interesting challenges for all of the drivers, the engineers, and of course the teams as a whole. But on top of that, the Belgian weather is a little less predictable. So we've got plenty to talk about this week on Tech Talk. So coming up, we are going to be taking a look at, well, Red Bull and wings. I'm sure there's a pun I could do there, but I'm not entirely sure what it would be. We'll be taking a look at some other wings and things as well as keeping cool in the Belgian summertime. And finally, we'll be taking a little bit of a look at America's new team in Formula One. Did you know that the Kemmel Rise, the long straight that follows the Eau Rouge and Raidillon section in the first sector of the lap at Spa, actually used to be a set of sweeping corners? And it was still absolutely flat out. So this circuit has always rewarded very low drag cars, and in recent years that's seen teams come to this circuit with really specific wing packages on their car. But things are a little bit different in 2026. Let's start with McLaren, one of the few teams this year that has introduced a new wing package onto its car for the Belgian Grand Prix. Here's the car in the pit lane earlier today, but if I look from this angle, I just wanted to show you the general shape of the wing here, because what we're used to seeing is the wings very much trimmed out, almost like a T-tray, not quite as extreme as you'd see at maybe Monza or even Las Vegas, but still pretty small wing packages. But here in the 2026 rules, you still see some pretty big upper elements on the wing. So what's going on? Well, the active aerodynamics system really effectively reduces the drag, so it allows the team to run a lot more wing angle and get that better downforce level through the middle sector and through all of the corners around the circuit. But when you compare this approach with the triple element wings that all cars are using in 2026 to, say, last year's approach from McLaren, here you can see that really slimmed out double element wing used for Spa by the McLaren team. And what they've done here, they introduced a special wing just to make sure that they've got the most efficient rear end package, and that means getting as much downforce as they need for the middle sector and a few of the slow speed corners, but especially getting as much top speed out of the car as possible. And last year, the Mercedes powered cars did struggle for top speed a little bit, but that's not a problem for them in 2026, at least it doesn't seem to be, does it? Even though Ford is the power unit that's meant to be the most powerful, and we'll come back to that shortly. I just wanted to show you a few other details around the car, because there are some other trends on the cars that you're going to see up and down the pit lane at Spa, and you'll see similar trends at Monza. Just want to show you the rear end package of the McLaren here and its cooling outlets, and that is a key aspect to look at. Just looking at the Aston Martin rear wing here from Spa last year, don't really know why, but I thought I'd show you it anyway. Moving on, we'll go to Mercedes rear wing. Mercedes is another team that's introduced a modified rear wing for Spa specifically this season, and you can see out on track how it's very much a smaller wing package than we have seen, say, at Silverstone, which is actually quite a high downforce circuit. And you do see some of the details here, just those elements, they're much smaller, but look how steep that final element is. Makes me think of Willem Tott's talk about rotational airflow, especially around the centre line of the car with that little tab that does seem to be growing on the centre line of the wing, doesn't it? Another thing to note, that Mercedes are clearly paying attention to what the rear suspension and the rear tyre is doing, with the addition of a camera pointing forwards on the rear wing end plate for free practice 1. Obviously that's going to have an aerodynamic impact that's a bit detrimental, but clearly they want to see what's going on further forwards on the car. And you'll see quite a few teams running interesting elements. Going back to McLaren, for example, if you look on the top during free practice 1 late in the session of the I always want to call it a DRS actuator, and it's not a DRS pod anymore at all, is it? It's the active aerodynamics pod. Well, there was a strange device on the top of it just at the end of free practice 1, and I didn't get a good enough look at it. Now, it could just be another camera like we saw on the Mercedes rear end there, or it could be a new aerodynamic element. And as I say this, I still haven't had a good enough look at it, so hopefully through the magic of television, you'll be able to see in the edit right now what that actually was. And if we haven't, well, this is all going to look a bit awkward, isn't it? And I'm sure people will write in and tell us what it was, because they'll have seen it in more detail by the time this goes out. Anyway, let's move on from that point back to the rear wings. We were looking at the Mercedes there, and we're looking at their active aerodynamics actuator, their smaller rear wing. Well, one team that we're not going to see anything particularly new on from the rear wing perspective, well, sort of, is Red Bull Racing. Now, they have reverted to their previous rear wing package and the previous active aerodynamics system. No longer will we see the flippy over rotisserie Macarena, call it whatever silly name you like, wing, where the upper elements flip over and go upside down, following the lead set by Ferrari. Because of Max Verstappen's curious accidents, particularly the most recent one at Silverstone, which cost him quite a haul of points in the Grand Prix and made the Dutchman a little bit unhappy. So they've reverted to a more proven, conventional active aerodynamic system. But check out the camera angles that Red Bull are looking at. You've got another camera mounted on the rear wing, clearly taking a look at the active aerodynamics actuator and how it's operating. So clearly something more to study for Red Bull in that part of the car. And that's sort of a bit surprising, because we've already seen this actuator package and this style of conventional active aerodynamics movement. So I wonder what it is Red Bull is studying there. Something that perhaps Red Bull didn't want us to study in such great detail is hiding underneath the main plane of the rear wing. And it is very subtle, but I do like it. Check out this small aerodynamic element on the underside of the wing, mounted on the inner part of the rear wing pylon. Now, I'll put that into a context for you. Now, if we look at the wing from this angle, you can't really see it at all. It's located just in here, underneath the main plane of the wing, on the inner faces of these pylons. Now, Red Bull did declare that they had changed their rear wing pylons, and I sort of expected to see a big change in the shape or something like that, but these little elements are absolutely exquisite in the terms of detail. You can just see it here, and I say elements because it's not just on the inner face of the upper part of the pylons. There is a second element in here, and from an aerodynamic point of view, you've got to think this is directly underneath the main plane of the rear wing. So to my eye, it almost appears like it's upside down. You'd expect to try and get a bit more downforce by having an element that was sort of that shape. You know, your classic motorsport wing shape. However, this is the aviation style aircraft wing shape, where you've got it almost upside down. So it's a little bit counterintuitive when you look at it, but when you look at little parts of a car like this just by eye, you can't really tell what they do, because Red Bull wouldn't be doing it if it didn't add performance to the car. So you do need to put a bit of CFD on that to work out what it does. Those of you at home, you know what to do. Now, further down the rear wing package is another little one of these elements, which does have the pattern that you'd sort of expect, with an upwashing shape. Here it is here, and once I've drawn over it, you can't really see it. But again, very hard to see. It's very subtle, very small, just a few millimeters across, but really exploiting an area of the car that I haven't seen any other team do since we've had these twin rear wing pylons, which have been around for quite a long time, and nobody's really been playing around on the inner faces of them. So quite a clever area of exploitation there by Red Bull, but you know, what else do you expect from a team that is apparently quite obsessed with wings? Now, talking of high-speed bulls in Belgium, Racing Bulls is another team I want to take a look at. Here is the Racing Bulls car in the pit lane at Spa, just one of them, and there's a few details I want you to pay attention to. First and foremost, Racing Bulls seems to have an absolute allergy to adding any sort of cooling outlet on its rear bodywork. For most of the season, the Racing Bulls car has been incredibly closed up. Why would you want a car closed up? Well, it reduces aerodynamic drag, and on a very high-speed circuit like Spa, where we may see some of the highest top speeds of the season all year long, not just at this point of the season, you do want a slippery low drag car. But for Racing Bulls, this seems to be pretty easy. And the only opening on the rear bodywork panel is this just little set of louvres on the left-hand side. But that's not the only Racing Bull cooling package on display in Spa, because on the other car, which was loitering in the garage, you'll see there's some quite significant difference when you look at the rear bodywork. Much taller but fewer cooling panels on the left-hand side. Indeed, only the left-hand side of the car being opened up for cooling, and that's because the cooling packages underneath the bodywork are asymmetric. What's in one side pod is not the same as what's in the other. That's pretty normal in Formula One, where you sometimes see what I call Quasimodo cars, where one's just slightly offset to the other. However, look again at these two cars. Take a look at this car in the garage and compare it to this car, and you'll start to see a few more changes in the bodywork. And we'll take a different look from a different angle. This is the car in the garage, and as you can see that panel that's interchangeable for the different cooling packages. It's quite a big panel, just those couple of slits in it. Well, let's take a look at the other car out on the pit lane. You'll notice the panel is a completely different shape. It's not just the panel, it's the entire rear bodywork package that's completely different on the Racing Bull here. You can clearly see that Racing Bulls have the option to open up a very large set of gills along the side of the bodywork, though they haven't got them fully open at this point. But that's not what's been drawing the headlines, is it? Because it's what's behind the driver's head just here. Racing Bulls have gone for a pretty dramatic visual change. Now, you remember at the start of the season how the Racing Bulls airbox was, well, it was distinctive, wasn't it? It was large, strangely shaped, and Racing Bulls were using the outer segments here for cooling airflow into the back of the car, and that's why I think they can run so tight on the rest of the bodywork. They're drawing airflow in the top. In the centre of the rollover structure here is the airflow for the Red Bull Ford V6 engine. Of course, underneath where this fan is, there's another cooling inlet as well. Well, that concept has remained, but the layout is quite different. They've gone square. They've discovered squares as well as the other shapes that they have in their CAD package. It's still quite a distinctive and perhaps not so pretty airbox shape, but you can see how the structure here is very much retained with that rollover structure. That's the bit that has to pass all of the load tests, but you've got different cooling arrangements on the outer segments here. My pen's really the wrong colour for a yellow roll hoop, isn't it? But this is actually a cladding around the structural part of the car. But when you compare them, you can still see the structural part is as it was with those remote support legs underneath the rollover structure. To look from a different angle, you can see it quite clearly here, that approach there. And it still has that slightly curious forward leaning section of the rollover impact. It makes me think that this section would be something of a stress concentration. As they squish down on the load test, it will build up here. But clearly Racing Bulls have got it working, so I'm just wrong. It's an interesting layout, and for me, Racing Bulls have really been pushing to reduce the drag on this car around this circuit. And in free practice one, it looked to be working. A few teams saying they're looking pretty quick around this circuit. Another thing that Racing Bulls have done, very pragmatic engineering here. Racing Bulls, rather than spending their cost cap on very neat new front brake inlet ducts for Spa, to reduce drag, they've just added some tape, which is old school motor racing engineering and not particularly unusual, but this tape is very calibrated tape, if you like. They blank off a few panels of the brake inlet, reduce the drag of the brake inlet, because you don't need so much brake cooling on a circuit that has a very high average speed, because the amount of air flowing through those ducts is higher than it would be on a circuit like we see in Hungary, where there's a much lower average speed. So you need all of that brake cooling inlet surface to get as much air through as possible, whereas at 300 kph plus around Spa, you just need smaller inlets. Well, you can reduce drag by putting a bit of tape on and save some money on the cost cap. And it's a similar story when you look at the cooling outlets. Actually, I was a bit surprised here because I saw these little inserts that Racing Bulls had on its front brake cooling outlets, this panel here, and I thought, oh, they've put that in for Spa. Actually, I went and compared it to the cooling outlets they had in Monaco, and the only real difference is this little section here is closed off for Spa. So actually, Racing Bulls clearly still have a bit too much front brake cooling, and I wonder what that's being saved up for Mexico. And speaking of North American things, Haas. Here's a look at one of the two Haas front wing end plates on display in the pit lane at Spa. And I want to draw your attention to this section of the front wing end plate. There's an awful lot more going on with the front wing end plate, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions with that, because we'll probably run out of time and they'll switch the lights off on me again, and I want to get some frites before we go home. Frites mayo, speciality of Belgium. Well, have a look at the shape of this. It's very much a downwashing, or looks to be a downwashing element coming out from the front wing end plate. Well, have a look at the newer version of it, which is fitted to the car that took out, and it's the exact opposite. So Haas clearly finding that one approach that they took maybe could be offset for a high-speed circuit with a completely opposite approach. This is the lovely thing about Spa and the other high-speed circuits. I'll be very interested to see what the team have fitted to the front of their car for the Hungaroring, because that could be a complete eye-opener, because if they go back to the downwashing version, then we start to learn a little bit more about these elements on the front wing end plates, which teams are taking on, putting back off, and nobody's quite sure their value. They clearly have something, but there's so much going on with the different shapes and the different areas of it that all of these little changes are adding up, and the performance increases on some of these cars are absolutely incredible. Moving on though, or moving underneath that section of front wing, have a look here. Now this is just a point of interest. I don't know how new this is, but it's the first proper view I've had a look underneath the Haas wing, and you can see a series of strakes running inboard from the front of the front wing, and this is something we've seen a few teams experimenting with. Racing Bulls had a very small cluster of little strakes earlier in the season, but this is a really quite aggressive solution from Haas. Again, really hard to say if it works, but clearly some real experimentation going on the underside of these wings, and the teams don't really like us taking too good a look at that part of the car, which is why we do it. There's just a really lovely bit of detailing on this car, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's here. The front wing support is a completely different design to anything we've seen previously in this generation of car. Normally the supports pop out of the nose down here, come to the front wing like that, but this one comes out of the side and it's got these plates along the side, which is something we haven't seen. It's almost like the wing's got two end plates. Almost reminds me of some of the 1990s style of front wings, and the car's just, this could be an area of real exploitation for a number of teams, because Haas has been able to innovate in this area of the car because they've got a lot more wind tunnel time than a lot of other teams do, because the wind tunnel and CFD allocation is limited based on how competitive your car was in the previous season, and the Haas, well, wasn't the most competitive. So they've come up with this solution, and I suspect it's one that a lot of other teams are going to be copying as the season goes on, and it's a really nice little solution. So I thought I'd show you all of that just now. So one car that we really do need to take a more detailed look at, and we are going to, is the Audi. Audi are one of the teams that have a dedicated rear wing for Belgium. There it is, but there's a lot more to come. But what I do want to draw your attention to is the angle of attack of the, well, we're not supposed to call them beam wings, but they're beam wings at the base of the rear wing, linking the rear wing end plates to the rear impact structure. It's almost vertical on that inner edge, which is really quite aggressive and quite surprising to see, but there's a lot of quite surprising things about that Audi, and it's a really impressive car, and we will be taking a more detailed look at it in the future. And before we get to the final car I want to talk about, just a quick note on the Williams team. In the post-free practice 1 show on F1 TV, James Vowles made some really interesting comments about the future of this car's development. And the way I understood it is he's very much hinting that Williams are planning not only to introduce a B-spec car in the next few races, but that car will actually feature a different chassis to the one they started the season with, which means it's essentially a new car. And that is pretty extraordinary if it's true, and I really do wait to see what Williams come out with, and we will of course be taking a very close look at that when they do it. Well, speaking about looking at things in more detail, Cadillac is the last team I want to talk to you about. Now, you've probably been used to seeing these front wing end plates on the American car, sometimes with additional sections sticking out of the front of it above that 3M logo. Well, these are the end plates introduced for Spa, and of course that element has returned as the sticky uppy bits have been revived with a little metal topped bit on there, which is very nice. Well, Cadillac allowed us to take a very detailed look at this car in the garage with Pat Simmons, and that show is available now on F1 TV. So if you haven't watched that already, I strongly advise that you do, because it's one of the best insights to the 2026 cars that I've experienced all year long. And I was standing in the garage with Pat Simmons while we recorded it. So for now, thanks for watching Tech Talk. It's the Belgian Grand Prix, and there's still so much more to happen. I think this is going to be one of the most revealing races of the season. It's also one of the most interesting technical circuits on the calendar.